So thank you, Mike, for having us on the Civil War Roundtable Congress. I'm Bert Dunkerly. I'm one of the co-authors of Force of a Cyclone about the Battle of Stones River in Tennessee. And my co-author, Caroline Davis, is going to lead us off.
Hi, I'm Caroline Davis. I'm the co-author of Force of a Cyclone, Battle of Stones River. So I guess to start here, I always start with a quote, and my favorite quote, or one of my favorite quotes from the Battle of Stones River, was actually written 8 months after the battle ended. And it's the words of Abraham Lincoln, President Abraham Lincoln, to General Rosecrans, like I said, 8 months after the battle had ended. And he writes, I can never forget, whilst I remember anything, about the end of last year and the beginning of this, you gave us a hard earned victory, which, had there been a defeat instead, the nation could scarcely live on. So I always start with that quote because I think it really sets up the importance of the Battle of Stones River and what it's going to turn into for both the Union and the Confederacy in 1862 and 1863. But to rewind now, we have to look at why are the armies in Murfreesboro to begin with, or how did they get to be in Murfreesboro to begin with? So for the Union, it's a little bit complicated. Lincoln needs a victory in order to help him politically um, coming into 1863. They have not had very good luck recently. They just had the massive defeat for the Union at Fredericksburg. And so Lincoln is really looking or really pressing to get a victory for the Union in December of 1862, because come January 1st of 1863, he's going to be signing into law, or what will essentially be enacted into law, is the Emancipation Proclamation. And so he has to have the Union civilian support for this, but he's losing that support rapidly due to the defeats that they've already suffered. So he's pushing his general, William Rosecrans, to really get him that victory that he's looking for before the emancipation goes into effect. And so on December 26th of 1862, General Rosecrans receives the orders that he is to move his army towards Murfreesboro, because that is where the Confederate Army has uh, set up their winter encampment under the command of General Braxton Bragg, um, and the Army of Tennessee. All right, so December 26, 1862, as you can see here on the map, Rosecrans is going to move his army out of Nashville, Tennessee, and move them closer or down to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where Braxton Bragg and his army are located. They're going to take three different routes to get there. It's going to be a bit of a long road to get to Murfreesboro for the Union, even though it's only about a 20 to 30 mile march. The reason being the weather is not cooperating with Rosecrans on this march, as well as the Confederate cavalry is giving them some trouble. But they eventually will reach Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on December 30th, and they will start to dig in for the battle that is going to be at hand here. December 30th, 1862, is a bit of an odd day. Both armies are now in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, or just outside of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And this is perhaps one of my favorite stories that comes out of the Battle of Stones River. It's a different type of battle that occurs, but on the night before the battle ensues, uh, there'll be a battle of the bands. Each army, like I said, has dug in. They're there. They've formed their battle lines. And as night starts to fall on their encampments, the both military bands are going to start playing music. And one of my favorite quotes that comes out of this is from Samuel Saye, and he says, "The night before the battle, an incident took place such as history seldom records. The opposing lines were so near to each other as to be within easy bugle call. Just before tattoo, the military bands on both sides began their evening music. The still winter night carried their strands to a great distance. At every pause on our side, far away could be heard the military bands of the other. Finally, one of them struck up Home Sweet Home, as if by common consent. All other airs ceased, and the bands of both armies, as far as the ear could hear, joined in the refrain." So this is a reminder that even though there's this massive battle that's looming ahead, the soldiers are being brought together one last time by the thought of going home. And this is going to be one of the more peaceful moments that you'll see on the battlefield here at Stones River before the violence really takes place. So in this slide here, you can see where the battle lines have essentially been drawn. Um, the interesting point of these initial battle lines is that both of these commanders, both Rosecrans and Bragg, they both went to West Point. And so as they're looking at the lay of the land, so to speak, they're going to decide on essentially the exact same battle plan that they want to attack with. So both Rosecrans and Bragg, they decide to hold with their right wing and center formations of their lines while attacking with the left wing against the enemy's right flank. So what's going to end up happening is this is going to end up forming almost like a pinwheel effect if it is done correctly and if both armies are successful in what they're doing. So for Bragg, his attack is going to be upon the Union right flank, pushing them back until they are cut off at the Nashville Pike. Essentially, the maneuver, if completed, would be similar to a door swinging shut on the Union Army. Rosecrans' attack, like I said, is going to be very similar. They're going to attack the Confederate right, push towards the town of Murfreesboro, hoping to pin the enemy between two portions of the Union Army, cutting off their escape and their supply lines. So essentially, you have the exact same battle plans going into this battle on the eve um, of December 30th. And so December 31st, we'll see how this all plays out. For both sides, we have three main players on each side underneath the general commanders here. So on the Confederate side, you're going to have Polk, Hardee, and Breckinridge. On the Union side, we're going to be talking about McCook, Thomas, and Crittenden. Um, so with those battle plans, even though they're extremely similar, there's going to be one major difference. And that major difference is going to be that the Confederates plan their attack much earlier. It's supposed to start much earlier than what Rosecrans has kind of outlined in his battle plan. So around 6 a.m. on December 31st, 1862, the Confederates are going to hit the Union right flank under McCook's command. This is going to be important that it's under McCook's command that where they're attacking. The Union on their right flank is easily overwhelmed. They are very much unprepared for the attack, despite Rosecrans telling McCook early on the evening of the 30th that he needed to prepare his men for battle because he even understood that his right wing would have been or it was more vulnerable than the rest of his line. So McCook receives these orders on December 30th. However, he does nothing with them. Instead, he turns around and he goes to bed without ever giving his troops any orders to prepare for battle. Um, so, with this being said, when the Confederates begin their attack or launch their attack at 6 a.m., that Union right flank is going to collapse in on itself. There's accounts of the Union soldiers still sitting around the campfires from that morning, drinking their morning coffee, and they are shot dead right where they sat, and that's where they remained as the Confederates swept through the area of that right flank. What does this mean for the Union at that point? Rosecrans realizes that his right flank is dissolving before his eyes. He orders units to hold the line, and he's trying to build a better and stronger defensive position, but he has to have time in order to do that. Thank you. And you can see here on the battle maps here that under Hardee's division, they're going to swing up and attack that right flank of the Union, and those under McCook are going to start retreating back. That's in the first map there that shows, and I believe that says 8 a.m. So you can see on that second map there that says 9:45 a.m. where the new battle lines are essentially at. You have McCook, who his troops have basically been decimated at this point. He has been pushed back, and you have Thomas and Crittenden, who are trying to hold the line as well as reinforce as best they can that right flank. And you can see that Hardee's troops, as well as some of Polk's troops now on the Confederate side, are pushing in on Confederates, or sorry, pushing in on the Union. Um, And so it seems that this snapshot of the battle, it seems as though the Confederate attack is is going to be highly successful. And it is for the time being. But that's going to change. Rosecrans orders units to hold the line, like I said, so he can rebuild a better and stronger defensive position. And that's going to be um, further back on the battlefield. Okay, so moving into that next phase of battle after that that initial um, Confederate attack that seems to be very successful. Um, the Union and the Confederates, they both find themselves in quite a predicament here. The Union is trying to hold the Confederates at bay, and Rosecrans believes he needs at least 2 hours to redesign or reestablish his defensive line. And so he's depending upon his soldiers out in the field and his commanders out there to really buy them that time. And so the photos that you see below, this is going to show the area that is going to hold the line and hold the Confederates back. And it's going to become known as the slaughter pen because of the fighting that occurs here. So the Union is holding the Confederates back. Like I said, the Confederate attacks at this point have become very disorganized and they're ill executed. So despite that initial wave of success here in the slaughter pen, the Confederates, they're still going to find some success, but the Union is going to put up quite a fight. And the Confederates, with their attacks not being organized and not being well executed, it's gonna fall apart just a bit here. Shortly before noon, the Confederate General Alexander Stewart coordinates an attack by his brigade along with 3 others. If executed correctly, this attack could result in the Union being surrounded on 3 sides. And so the result, and because it is successful, the results of the fight in and amongst the rocks gain the name Slaughter Pen because of the horrific scene that plays out, and the Union becomes almost trapped at this point. But what they have done is what they have done, sorry, is they have bought Rosecrans enough time to rebuild his defensive line. And so the fighting in the Slaughter Pen is extremely horrific and extremely difficult. But it succeeds for both the Confederates as well as the Union at that point, because the Union has now been able to build their new defensive line. And the Confederates, we can start to see the breakdown in their command at this point in the battle.
Okay, so while the main battle is going on, there's a side action a little bit to the west on the fringe of the battlefield that involves the cavalry of both sides. And this is an extremely important part of the battle. It's one that I think is often overlooked, and it's also a fascinating part of the battle. Uh, the area beyond the main battlefield was flat and open. It was just a perfect place for cavalry. If you look at the right hand map here, the 945 map, the area underneath the word Rosecrans, and you can see Wharton's Confederate cavalry on the left side of that map, advancing on the fringe of the main Confederate infantry advance. And what the Confederates are going to try to do is get behind the Union Army, disrupt them, and ideally capture supplies and cut them off from their retreat route, which would be the Nashville Pike. It's the only road that they have, and you can see it coming in from the upper left-hand side of that map. So John Wharton commands the Confederate cavalry at this time, and he will write that the enemy's immense wagon trains, guarded by a heavy force of cavalry, could be seen moving near and in rear of the enemy. I determined to move across country, give the cavalry battle, and attempt to capture the train. And at this point, a hero emerges for the Union, someone you probably never heard of, Captain Gates Thurston. He is a staff officer, and he is with General McCook's wagon train. These are 75 wagons full of supplies and ammunition, and he has less than 100 men to guard them. And he sees this Confederate cavalry coming. And what Thurston's going to do is try to guide the wagon train out of the way. And they go cross country, they cut through fields, they use farm lanes to try and get out of the way of this advancing Confederate cavalry. As he's trying to do this, he comes across Colonel Zam, who leads an Ohio brigade of cavalry, and he asks Zam for help. And these three Ohio regiments will come charging in and literally collide with the Confederate cavalry. There's some close quarter fighting. The Federals are able to hold off the Confederates initially. The wagon train keeps trying to move away and get out of this fight. But eventually, the Union troopers are outnumbered and they're pushed back. And the Confederates will briefly capture the Union supply line, the Nashville Pike, and the wagon train. And this is kind of their high water mark. It's like they've done it. They've captured the wagons. They've captured the road. For the moment, they've cut off the Union Army from escape and reinforcement from Nashville. But they've bitten off more than they can chew. They don't really have enough men to hold this wagon train. It's immense. And they're not really able to move it and take it with them. And in the meantime, the Union forces are regrouping. Colonel Baxter Smith of the 4th Tennessee Cavalry would write, "Instead of burning it, as we could have done, we tried to bring it off. We ventured too far. We could not hold the prize and had to give up most of the wagons." So Union cavalry is going to counterattack and drive the Confederates off and recapture the wagon train and retake the Nashville Pike and drive the Confederates away. And then at this point, we're going to have a second phase of the cavalry engagement when both Union and Confederate reinforcements arrive. The first are going to be the Confederates under General Wheeler. They'd been on a raid and they'd spent the morning attacking isolated Union posts further away, and they finally made it to the battlefield. And at the same time, Union cavalry reinforcements under General David Stanley will arrive. And the pictures that you're seeing now, that's Thurston on the upper left, and that's General Stanley on the right. And Stanley is going to have a great day here for the Union cavalry. He's going to command troopers from Michigan, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and they're going to gradually push the Confederate cavalry back. The Confederates are exhausted. They've been in the saddle for hours, and they've kind of lost their steam. One observer would write of General Stanley, "I witnessed one of the most heroic scenes of the war. Stanley standing in his stirrups, erect, his saber raised above his head, and a voice distinctly heard above the noise, 'The man who does not follow me is a damn coward.' And Stanley led a cavalry charge which pushed the Confederates back. And by this point, it's late in the afternoon, and the fighting is starting to subside elsewhere. And the cavalry action ends with the Confederates falling back. But for a while, it was touch and go. A lot of intense fighting on the fringe of the main battlefield. I want to go back to the main battlefield and talk about where Caroline left off. The Confederates had pushed the Union troops out of the slaughter pen. They'd almost surrounded them. But on other parts of the Union line, they are holding. And one particular place is called the Round Forest. It was a wooded area. It would be the only area on the battlefield that the Union troops hold throughout the day. They are never driven from this position. And the Confederates are going to launch a series of attacks against the Round Forest. Show you, here's a image of that site today, part of the Stones River National Battlefield Park. The first attack is going to come at 9 in the morning, and it's a Mississippi brigade that charges twice. The next attack is an hour later. It's a Tennessee brigade. and one of their regiments will lose 300 of 400 men and actually make it all the way up to the Union lines and engage in some hand to hand fighting. But they will be pushed back. The Union troops in this sector are commanded by General William Hazen. He has four regiments, one from Ohio, one from Indiana, one from Illinois, one from Kentucky. And at one point, Hazen's troops are starting to waver, and his commander tells him to fall back. And he says, "Where the hell am I going to fall back to?" He's got no reserve, he's got nowhere else to go. But the Union troops fight tenaciously here. A third attack will come in the early afternoon. Two brigades, who actually had to cross Stones River from the west or the east bank to the west bank. And in so doing, they have to cross through the river and get soaked. One soldier wrote that their clothes were frozen in the cold air and having to go through that cold water. And then finally, a fourth attack, also with two brigades, will go forward. None of these attacks will really make a dent in the Union line. And by then, it's late in the day and daylight is fading. The Round Forest is going to earn a nickname called Hell's Half Acre. And this is one of the key spots on the battlefield where the Union troops make a stand and are able to hold off the Confederates throughout the day. And this is happening while the action that Caroline described is happening a little bit below that, the slaughter pen and the Confederates advancing from there. These were four uncoordinated attacks, none of them with more than two brigades at a time. So they really had no chance of success. You just need overwhelming numbers to break through. And the Confederates were just not able to concentrate their forces to achieve that level. So again, if you look at the map here on the right-hand side of the screen, the slaughter or the Round Forest, Hell's Half Acre, is just about in the middle, where you see the Cowan House and the railroad line running there. Palmer, division commander. The Round Forest is right there. That's where the Confederates are trying to launch these attacks throughout the day that fail. And you can see it's an anchor point because from there, the rest of the Union line is extending to the west. And so if that point gets overrun, the Union loses their anchor point where their line is stationed. So it's a critical spot for them to hold on to. As the evening comes on, the fighting dies down. The Union Army is able to regroup along the Nashville Pike, and the Confederates are spent. They've lost their adrenaline. That initial success can only go so far. Like you see in a lot of attacks, it just runs out of steam. And overnight, both sides will consolidate, try to improve their positions, try to reorganize themselves. There's a lot of units being mixed up and commanders down. There's a lot of confusion. And both sides prepare for what's going to happen the next day.
January 1st, both armies come to a truce agreement. They have both taken a massive beating on New Year's Eve, on December 31st. So come New Year's Day, both armies, like I said, they're going to come to a truce agreement. No fighting's really going to occur. There's going to be some skirmishing, but not very much at all. Really nothing worth noting. However, what's really going to make a difference is Van Cleve's division fords the Stones River and takes up a new position on the east bank of Stones River. And this is going to become extremely important on the morning or on January 2nd of 1863, because this is what's going to lead to the final day of battle, January 2nd. So on the morning of January 2nd, 1863, John C. Breckinridge, one of Bragg's Confederate generals, he reports to Braxton Bragg the new Union position on that east bank of the river. Bragg is going to order Breckinridge to attack that east bank. Breckinridge does not agree with this order at all. And he tries to convince Bragg to take it back and not force his hand in launching this attack. But Bragg is not going to budge. Bragg really, and in this instance between Breckinridge and Braxton Bragg, you're going to see that breakdown in command. And I hate to John C. Breckinridge. He is one of my Civil War idols, so to speak. Um, so I hate to put anything back on him, but you're really going to see a lack of respect amongst the commanders at this point because Breckinridge fights so hard against Braxton Bragg and the orders that he receives. Um, and it's not just Breckinridge who disagrees with Bragg's orders here. Another general, it was said, had to be physically restrained when he learned of the orders that were being given, and that he was shouting that he wanted to go and kill General Bragg at that point in time. So this really shows the breakdown and the tension that's occurring within this Confederate leadership. However, Breckinridge, being the dutiful general that he is, he's going to finally agree to launch this attack. What he decides is he's going to plan for his attack to take place at about 4 p.m. on January 2nd of 1863. He's hoping that the fading daylight at 4 p.m. will hopefully interfere with the 57 Union Canyon on the bank of the river there facing them. Um, He's also going to order the Confederate artillery to fire upon the Union starting about roughly 15 minutes before um, the charge is supposed to take place. And then once that Confederate cannon fire starts, about 15 minutes later, he's going to order his men, which would have been roughly about 4,400 men, so 4,400 men, to load one round and fix bayonets. At that point, he's going to order them to charge. So this plan is set in motion, and you can see here on the maps of the one showing 4 p.m. on January 2nd of 1863, where the two lines are. You can see Rosecrans, they have over there on, they have Crittenden, and they're going up against across the Stones River. They're the ones that have been set up there on that east bank of the river. So how does this attack play out? So at 3:45, the Confederates start firing their cannons on that Union position across Stones River. At 4 p.m., Breckinridge is going to give the order to charge across the Stones River and try to take that Union defensive position, or that Union line. So the plan seems to work for about the first 15 minutes or so, because the Confederates are successful in driving the Union from the east bank of the river. However, Breckinridge makes a crucial error at this point. He's laid out what he wants his men to do in those opening phases of this battle on the second day, or on January 2nd. However, he doesn't give out any orders as to what should happen if they do in fact take the hill that the Union position is on. So they're left with a decision as to what to do next. Um, the Confederates not having any orders from their commander at this point, they're going to continue to follow the retreating Union from the hill. This is crucial because what this means is by this time, the Union, their whole line has realized what is happening with the Breckinridge attack. And so the Union artillery is able to then zero in on the men in gray running down the hill, chasing after the Union that had been positioned there on the east bank of the river. Um, this also allows the Union infantry to open fire on the Confederates, because by this point the Union knows exactly what's happening. They see that the Confederates are taking this hill. The Confederates are running down the backside of that hill, essentially chasing the retreating Union. And the Union has those reinforcements that they were needing. So their artillery is zeroing in on them, as well as the Union infantry that are there as well. And so what does this do to the Confederates? Confederates are going to then be forced to retreat as well. So you have this back and forth seesaw motion a bit. you have the Confederates who take the hill, they're winning, or this portion of the battle at least, and then all of a sudden you have um, the reinforcements for the Union show up essentially, and they're able to then reforce Breckinridge and his men back across the Stones River, back into their own lines. And that's what you can see in this second map here of 445 at the Battle of Stones River. You see the Confederates then having to turn around and start retreating back across the river. This last day of battle and this fighting here for Breckinridge and his men is devastating to them. Breckinridge is going to be reported riding around on his horse, holding his head, crying about his orphans, his poor orphans. One of the brigades under his command was known as the Orphan Brigade. It was mostly men made up from the counties in Kentucky who were fighting with them, known as the Orphan Brigade, because Kentucky, of course, doesn't choose a side in the war. And so this brigade, in and of itself, takes heavy casualties, and it's completely decimated during the fighting here on January 2nd. Um, and this is how the Battle of Stones River is going to end, with the failure, eventual failure of the Breckinridge attack at McFadden's Ford, and trying to take that Union position. This was really their last hope. Bragg was really holding out that Breckinridge would be able to get it done, and they do get it done, but unfortunately, because of the lack of follow through with orders as to what to do if they are successful initially, they are forced to retreat, and the Battle of Stones River will come to a close.
After that initial successful first day, General Braxton Bragg telegraphed the capital in Richmond that, hey, we've won a great victory. And then the second day of the battle happens. Whoops. So Bragg has to admit that it's not as great as it might have looked at first. He will have to call a council of his officers, decide what to do. The Union Army won't budge. The Confederates are low on supplies. They don't have any more men. They've used everybody they've got. And it's generally decided that they must pull back. So, just a few days after the battle, the Confederates pull back and abandon Murfreesboro and move further south in Tennessee. And the Union Army will move into Murfreesboro and occupy it and start to fortify it and hold it for the rest of the war, as it turns out. We have a 2-day battle, 3-day battle, really, with 2 main days of action. 13,000 Union casualties and about 10,000 Confederate casualties. And even though it's not a decisive Union victory, it is a victory. It's not a pretty victory, but it is one. And what's really crucial, like Caroline said at the beginning, is when it happened. Major Union defeat at Fredericksburg. Major defeat in Mississippi at Chickasaw Bayou, outside of Vicksburg. So here we have a bright spot. And the first major point to make here is that for the rest of the war, the Union Army is going to occupy Middle Tennessee. The Confederates will be denied its resources, its manpower. Yes, the Civil War will come back when Hood's army invades in 1864, but they never permanently recapture this area. And from here, the Union can use Nashville and Murfreesboro as stepping stones to go down towards Chattanooga and then Atlanta and so on. So it's an important part of the progression of the war. General Bragg, some of our listeners might know, has a poor reputation as an army commander. And there's a lot of infighting in the Confederate Army of Tennessee, and that all stems from Stones River. In the days after the battle, Bragg took a poll. He asked his commanders that if they did not agree with his leadership, if they felt he was not competent to command, he would voluntarily step down. And when the results came back that they all agreed, he got mad and refused to step down. And this whole infighting between Bragg and some of his officers is just going to get real ugly. and it's going to plague the Army of Tennessee for the rest of the war. And so inside the Army is all this tension and the spirit of backstabbing and uncooperation, and it's going to get real awful. So the Confederate Army of Tennessee is going to be stuck with this poisonous atmosphere. As we move into 1863, the war is accelerating on many fronts and on many levels. Union armies penetrating into Mississippi, moving through Middle Tennessee, always advancing and trying to advance in Virginia. But the war is escalating, and the Confederate economy is shrinking, inflation is setting in, shortages, all those things. And then lastly, the importance of emancipation, because when 1863 dawns, that's now federal law, federal policy to free slaves and use them as combat troops, enlist them in the Army and Navy. And Murfreesboro itself will become a major recruiting center for U.S. colored troops at the fortress that's built there by the Union Army that occupies Murfreesboro. And it changes the nature of the war, because now as the Union Army advances, runaway slaves are going to be encouraged to come and follow them and join them. That denies that labor to the Confederacy. So those are some of the key takeaways, but I will let Caroline come back and add her final thoughts as well.
So my final thoughts about the Battle of Stones River. I know within the Civil War community, we all like to debate what the turning point of the war is. And looking at what happens or the aftermath of Stones River and what happens there at Stones River, and looking to see just how important this relatively unknown battle is in the grand scheme of things. I personally believe you can debate between Gettysburg, Vicksburg, and all, but the turning point of war really truly starts here at Stones River. What Bert just went over, you see the acceleration of the war, you have the Emancipation Proclamation coming into effect, and you see that the Union is now able to make more of these larger scale movements to penetrate deeper into the South. And you'll see them get reinforcements to Vicksburg at this point. Later on, you'll have Sherman's March to the Sea, all really because Middle Tennessee was lost in December of 1862 and January of 1863. So for me, the biggest takeaway from the Battle of Stones River is just how significant of a turning point this one singular battle is, specifically for the Union, because they're now able to make more of these large military operations and are successful in them, but also for the Confederacy, because this was their first line of defense, and it was gone at this point. So that's my biggest takeaway from the Battle of Stones River is the turning point and really how it marks what's going on as a whole within the Civil War.
And I will just add that if anyone is interested in the book, it is called Force of a Cyclone. It's published by Savas Beatty. You can go to the Savas Beatty website to look for it. And it does include information about touring the battlefield, sites to see outside the park, sites to see in Murfreesboro related to the battle that are maybe not as well known or kind of tucked away. So thank you, Mike, for having us, and we appreciate it.